Hello and welcome to Decentralized Everything. I'm Mandy McGill, and today we have an extraordinary guest whose pioneering work is transforming how organizations and individuals conceptualize the future of work. Please join me in welcoming Ravin Jesuthasan, a distinguished futurist, global thought leader, and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. Renowned for his insights on automation, human capital, and the evolving workforce. Currently, he serves as senior partner and global leader for transformation services at Mercer and has led research projects for the World Economic Forum, where he serves on the steering committee for work and employment. His influence is far-reaching, recognized as one of the top 25 most influential consultants in the world by Consulting Magazine, one of the top 8 future of work influencers by Tech News, and one of the top 100 influencers by HR Executive. He was also named to the prestigious Thinkers 50 Radar class of 2020, and his book, Work Without Jobs, was featured on the Thinkers 50 Best New Management book. Ravin is the author of several widely acclaimed books that offer practical frameworks for navigating the future of work. Transformative HR, How Great Organizations Use Evidence-Based Change for Sustainable Advantage, Lead the Work, Navigating a World Beyond Employment, Reinventing Jobs, a 4-step approach for applying automation to work, and Work Without Jobs, How to Reboot Your Organization's Work Operating System, a Wall Street Journal bestseller featured as a Thinkers 50 Best New Management book. Throughout his career, Ravin has authored over 200 articles, including 15 for the Harvard Business Review and MIT Sloan Management Review. Today, we're diving deep into topics such as why jobs are giving way to skills as the new currency of work, Ravin's Deconstruct, Redeploy, Reconstruct framework, and how it's reshaping the nature of work, the role of AI in matching talent to tasks, and where human judgment remains essential, overcoming legacy mindsets in traditional industries, especially in the built environment. What policy, technology, and culture need to evolve for a more skills-powered, flexible world of work? By the end of our conversation, you'll walk away with fresh frameworks and actionable insights for embracing a future where agility, human potential, and skills, not title or job descriptions, shape how work gets done. So without further ado, let's get on with our conversation with Ravin. Thank you for joining us. In your latest book, you argue that jobs are giving way to skills as the currency of work. At Idifico, we're discovering that many clients in commercial real estate haven't even considered that they could access specific expertise for projects without hiring entire firms. It's really never occurred to them as a possibility because the industry has always operated this way. So once we show them that they can get a structural engineer for a specific phase or a construction manager who doesn't work for a general contractor, they immediately see the value. So how do you help organizations recognize opportunities they didn't even know existed when they've been operating within the same framework for decades?
Yeah, firstly, it's lovely to be here with you. And that's such a great question because, we have this legacy of how we think about work, right? It's work that is bound up in a job. It's work that's done by a vendor that manages all of this because that's how we've always done it. And it's fascinating that once we show companies how deconstructing that legacy, analyzing opportunities to redeploy, and then reconstructing the work in new ways of working, the gains that they can get in terms of productivity, efficiency, and agility. Now, I've written, as you know, Mandy, 6 books and probably about 250 articles on these topics, including about 15 for the Harvard Business Review and the Sloan Management Review. And it is truly fascinating that once they see the prize, their eyes really kind of light up. And they also see that, particularly with AI and the power it brings to coordination, that many of the old arguments for why you would give an entire chunk of work to this entity or put it within a job, those coordination mechanisms that once were the things that made it easy to do that, with AI, it helps you overcome so many of those challenges and capture the opportunities that come from transcending that high frictional cost, those high frictional cost ways of working that companies have employed for so many years.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love how you said put it in a job because, we're even organizations have their own frameworks and ways of working, but every single company, regardless of which one it is, still thinks of this as a job and a job description. So maybe you could dive in a little deeper on how you explain to people that jobs are really not the right way to be thinking about work in the future.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Particularly as you work with and how it comes into organizations. It really affects work at that elemental task level. It affects some of the surrounding elements of work, like coordination, as we've just talked about. And so the framework that I've used for a long time, my co-author John Boudreau and I wrote about a new work operating system and the four principles there of starting with the work, understanding how humans and machines could be combined, understanding where the work of humans could be done through alternative ways of engaging talent, and then creating that mindset, skill set, and tool set to keep reinventing work. But the methodology really boils down to three parts: taking a job or a process and deconstructing it into its core parts, relying the skills and capabilities required to do that work, whether by a human or machine, looking at redeployment options and understanding what are the costs, capabilities, and risks of work being done elsewhere, and what gains could we get in terms of productivity, efficiency, and agility. And then the third part is once we've redeployed work to their optimal options, how do we reconstruct new and more effective and efficient ways of working that allow us to keep reinventing work, because we know AI is going to keep advancing, and with its advances, many, many new ways of organizing work and getting work done.
And it really requires that kind of big systems thinking. And almost, when I think about the real estate industry and how many kind of, you have your bigger companies and general contractors, but then you have all of these small ones too. And so do you think, just out of curiosity, do you think this is going to happen such that the big ones kind of adopt these ways of working, and then the smaller companies sort of figure that out as they watch the big ones do it? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah. And so in the beginning of this call, we were talking about decentralization. And I really think with the power of AI, with these new options for connecting people to work in more efficient and effective ways, you're going to see a lot of these large organizations shift from we have to own every resource to increasingly our core competence is going to be our ability to orchestrate these different options for getting work done so that we can meet the needs of a customer based on the
Sure.
price points they have as those needs change, etc. So the premium is going to change from it's easy for me to just give everything to this one company that's going to charge me a lot, but I have quote unquote one throat to choke, to
Sure.
increasingly, I as a customer, I want both. I want one throat to choke. I may want one throat to choke, but I want the benefits of the agility and the efficiency that come from these more effective and efficient ways of coordinating work.
Interesting. I'm so excited about it personally. Okay, so let's talk about your framework: deconstruct, redeploy, and reconstruct. So this provides a methodology for breaking down traditional job structures. And when I think about a role like project manager in construction, for example, that person will handle everything from vendor coordination to budget tracking to stakeholder communication to regulatory compliance, right? So, a lot of things they have to be thinking about in any given day. If an organization wanted to start deconstructing a role like this, where would they begin? And what's the most effective way to identify which tasks truly need to stay bundled together versus which ones could be distributed or handled by specialists?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mandy. And you know, it really starts with that taking the job and pulling it apart into its key bundles, understanding what each of the activities are, understanding where the activities are subject to maybe compliance or control sort of elements, or certain types of oversight, where, for example, a regulator or a trade association might say this group of activities has to sit together, right? Because it's what's required to ensure a successful outcome. So what are the external constraints on those activities, and then understanding, the types of activities. Is the activity repetitive versus variable? Is it work that's done independently versus interactively? Is it physical versus mental in nature? So the sort of how the activities might be classified. And then the next part of that is asking the question of what my co-author John and I would call the return on improved performance. So if I do this work better, what's the ROI? Because there's some work where you aren't really looking for a productivity gain where I want it done better. You're just looking for it to be done right. And in which case, there is a whole different set of constraints versus work where you're looking for it to be done creatively, looking for it to push the envelopes, like maybe certain types of design work, versus other work where you just want it to be done the same way, but more effectively and productively, etc. So understanding that return on improved performance, so that understanding of the work and the elemental activities, what the objective outcome is and what constraints sort of might surround the work is really important in that deconstruct phase.
Really interesting that you mentioned trade associations. So what do you see their role being in kind of coming up with some framework for, different companies to use? How do you see that working?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Let me give you an example from work, not in your sector, but in a different sector. So I've done a lot of work in healthcare. And during COVID, we had such massive shortages of nurses. And some of the healthcare systems I worked with were incredibly effective at pulling apart, some of the core nursing jobs and, figuring out how do we get people doing the work at the top of their license, right? So the work that they are certified in, that they really enjoy doing, and how do we push the stuff that, got lumped into their jobs just because of inertia and legacy,
Right.
down to areas where the talent supply is maybe more plentiful. And what was fascinating was initially some of the regulatory bodies resisted some of those challenges, but when they heard from their members, the nurses who were being certified, that this is what we want, it's allowing us to deliver the sort of care that we want to deliver. It's making our lives better. That's what's triggered across, a number of states, a review of what an RN certification might look like, and what work should they be focused on versus what work could they push down to someone like a certified medical assistant. And so I think the same thing is true with some of these certification bodies in construction, and particularly at a time when I think the industry is at a bit of an inflection point, right? Particularly when you think of the massive shortage in residential housing stock. How do we free up and take the friction out of getting new homes built by making the work more accessible, having more people come into the space, and allowing the talent that has been in the space to kind of move up the value chain, if you will, right? So it's an opportunity for a win-win, I think, if done right.
Absolutely. And to be honest, there really aren't certifications in construction. Like at this point, if you want to work for a general contractor, now this is commercial building, of course, but so it's going to be different than residential, but still same ideas, right? And still same sort of process, just on a smaller scale. But you can't get a certification. You have to have a degree in construction management, a 4-year degree. I mean, there may be some certs out there, but I recruited for the industry for so long that, I know that this is what they're looking for, is that degree. And unfortunately, those degrees don't even train the students really how to get out there and like build. It's very, kind of like top level, just theory, unfortunately. So I think even just advocating for there being certificates available at the education level
Absolutely
would be
and that
perfect.
is true of every profession out there, right? Our legacy mindset of those one-to-one relationships of a degree matched to a person, matched to a position,
Yeah.
to increasingly now what we wrote about in this last book, the skills-powered organization, the many-to-many between the skills required to do the work, the numerous nano and micro upskilling, reskilling, certification opportunities, and then the connection to the work that needs to be done.
And as a side note, so important for our young people, right?
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
COVID just I have a 21-year-old daughter. So, like she was right in the thick of COVID. So, they just need those opportunities to
Yeah.
feel good about themselves too. So it kind of comes full circle for society here. Okay, so you've written extensively about AI's role in the future of work. So at Idifica, we're using AI to match specific professional skills with projects needed in real time. From your research, what's the sweet spot for AI and talent matching, and where does it add the most value, and where does human judgment need to come in and the relationship kind of need to remain?
Yeah. I think AI is uniquely suited for market making and matching, analyzing what the work is, identifying the skills required, analyzing talent to identify, to understand their skills, matching that talent to the work, nudging that talent to say, well, you've got these skills, but did you know that if you took on this course, you would obtain these additional skills, which would open up these new opportunities for you? So the opportunity to keep more efficiently connecting talent to work and continuing to help talent develop and connect to new opportunities is an area where I think AI is so uniquely suited. Where the human judgment comes in, frankly, is on not the mechanical aspects of connecting people to work or, coordinating as we've talked about, but in building those human relationships. If you're my supervisor, you spending the time to understand what I'm really passionate about, what I'm really interested in learning and developing, the sort of career I aspire to, all of those things make for, help us transcend the transactional aspects of work. AI can handle the mechanical and the transactional. But those human to human connections of knowing that someone has a supervisor who actually cares about them,
Yeah.
who values them and understands what they want to do, that's what keeps people connected, within organizations. It's what gets people to stay beyond what AI can do to increase the efficiency of how people are connected to work.
And I feel like in some ways it's like the AI is going to allow us to build relationships like we did 20 years ago. Because right now we're so focused on our computer and entering information. And say if you're in sales, you've got to put it in Salesforce. And there's all these things, right, that we're doing instead of being relational as humans. And what AI is going to do, it's my hope and belief that it will free us to do those things again instead of having to be hacking away at our computer, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
So that's the hope, and I'm glad to hear that, we believe that we can get there.
Yeah.
Okay, so in your work with large organizations, what are the biggest barriers you see to adopting the skills-based operation models? In CRE, we're dealing with very traditional procurement processes, risk-averse corporate real estate departments, and established vendor relationships. So how do you help organizations overcome the "we've always done it this way" mentality?
Boy, that's such a great question, Mandy. It's the ability or the inability to transcend that legacy, right? That legacy of mindset, skill set, and tool set is really at the heart of so many of these challenges. The problem is, or maybe the opportunity, I guess, is once you show people the prize, right? How much more they could get done for that incremental dollar. It starts to create in their minds a sense of, because people, we are all naturally very risk averse animals, right? And people default to their legacy because they are risk averse. They're afraid. And so what it's getting them to see that I could actually get you exponentially more, and at the same time getting them to understand that frankly the risk that is being injected is not that significant at all.
Yeah.
And it's not, what they perhaps naturally fear. Different can be, incredibly sort of, people can be fearful of different. But I think if they could see the opportunity, if they could see the controls that are in place around different, I think they would see that it's an opportunity not to get 2 or 3% more, which they can do from squeezing their legacy vendors, but an opportunity to get 20 or 30 or 40% more, which they could never get from their old ways of working.
So, okay, your research shows how this shift impacts organizations, but what about the individual professional? So, in our industry, we're seeing talented architects, engineers, and project managers who feel trapped in traditional firm structures. So, what advice do you give professionals who want to transition from job based careers into skills based work?
this doesn't work for everyone. For some people, they comfortable with the stability, they're comfortable with what they perceive to be consistency. But for many people, and often the people at the very top of their profession, they want to push the boundaries. They want to go well beyond what they might be kind of, for want of a better phrase, stuck doing every day. And for those individuals, what you're seeing are platforms like yours. We see similar platforms for other industries. I think of Tongle for creative talent producing movies and the like, Top Coder for AI and data scientists and developers. And the talent you often find on those platforms are so incredibly ahead of the game. And it's because they want to truly own the next iteration of themselves.
Yeah.
And for them, it's understanding that you need to sort of create the space for you to keep learning and developing and pushing the envelope. You need the opportunity to take on projects that are going to allow you to, color outside the lines, maybe, that to allow you to do something different, because that continuous both deepening and widening of the skill sets is what is going to really differentiate the winners and the losers going forward.
It's so true. It also, as someone who's doing this myself, learning something new every week, literally, because there's so much available. There's so much tech
Right.
available now. It's a lot of fun, and also by Friday, I'm tired.
You know, it's such a good point. I'm saying to my clients, right, we have to be really intentional about designing in space for learning and well-being into the flow of work. So you can't be just doing the upskilling and reskilling at 10 o'clock on Saturday when the kids are in bed.
That's right.
It has to be intentional and designed in. And I'm now seeing, with some of my larger companies, clients, whether it's in financial services or in oil and gas, this intentionality when they deconstruct, redeploy, and reconstruct, they're not reconstructing so that 100% of every waking moment is spent doing the work. I've got a client in financial services that reconstructed their new jobs to 93%. Because the idea being that that 7% is for you to keep staying ahead of the game. It's for you to have the flexibility. It's for you to, if you've got a sick child at home, you've got the flexibility to stay home. If you need to sort of take some time off to, pursue, try something different, you've got that space. But, making sure again that there is space for learning and well-being in the flow of work.
That's so good and so important to mention, and I'm glad that's where they're headed, because it also kind of feels like I think a lot of people don't love the idea of AI because they're like, oh, you want me to turn into a robot. No, actually, we want you to be human. Recognizing that, we can't be working 24/7. That's great. Looking ahead 5 to 10 years, do you envision a world where project-based, skills-driven work becomes the norm rather than the exception? And if so, what needs to happen from a policy, technology, or cultural standpoint to support professional and organizations in making sure that this transition is successful?
Yeah, I'd really like to see more flexible and agile ways of working, become much more prominent for sure, right? As you say, today it's truly the exception, and it's such a rarity for organizations. And it's funny because 10 years ago, my second book called Lead the Work, Navigating a World Beyond Employment, was published, and someone posted about it on LinkedIn today. And it was so interesting to see that in 10 years, it feels like all those ideas we talked about, there's a handful of organizations who've really embraced it and pushed the envelope on some of it, but so many organizations are still stuck in the past. And I think, I talked about mindset, skill set, and tool set, but I do think what you need are leaders who can really think outside of that traditional boundaries. Your point about policy is a really important one. There are a number of states who are enabling, benefits and other workforce support processes, whether it's healthcare, whether it's pension, whether it's learning, resources and flexible spending accounts to be used much more aggressively in a tax advantage and tax deferred way that I think will be better supportive of these new ways of working. The technology, goodness knows, is certainly there, right? If you think of how the tools at our disposal, if you think of platforms like yours, I think the technology is absolutely there. I think it's the mindset of leaders and underpinning that is the cultures that they've created, and then also some of the policy ops that I think sometimes get in the way.
Yeah. So a lot of work to do. I mean, like I said, I have a lot of hope, and your books have certainly supplied me with, opened up my eyes to just a whole new world. So really, really appreciate you coming on with me today and sharing this, and I look forward to sharing it with my friends, and will continue to follow your work. So thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Wow, that was an amazing conversation. I hope you learned a ton. If you'd like to explore more of Ravin's work, here's where you can find him. His official website features his latest articles, interviews, podcasts, and videos. That's at ravinjesuthasan.com. On social media, he shares insights on the future of work in AI, so follow him on X at Ravin Jesuthasan. So if you liked what you heard today, be sure to check out his books and articles and follow him online for the latest insights.